Alright guys, so for our first speaker for tonight, we have the director for the Center of Entrepreneurship, and he will be presenting his talk called Demystified Entrepreneurship. So here is our first speaker, Patrick McQuown.
Hey everybody. Okay, sounds like you can hear me all right. Is this too loud? No, it's okay. So we're going to talk about entrepreneurship, and we're not going to talk about a company, but why entrepreneurship matters and what it's good for. And seeing as we're at JMU, and this is my favorite week for college sports, we're going to kind of go into something to do with college sports and entrepreneurship. So before that, let's just lay down some ground rules. So entrepreneurship, as I like to define it, is the pursuit of opportunity regardless of the resources that are currently controlled. I think we're playing with the mic, okay. And then additionally, there's problems everywhere. Problems range from people are dying on the streets to my college basketball team isn't doing that well. And what we do is, when we have a problem, we come up with a solution. And when we have that, that gives us an opportunity. Okay, so remember that, problem, solution, opportunity. Passion is what you're going to use to fuel yourself as you go through this journey. And then everybody has a secret power to kind of identify these problems and identify these solutions. And that's empathy. Empathy is your secret power for getting this done. So, how does this relate to what we're talking about today? Well, what we're going to talk about is the birth of the Big East Basketball Conference back in 1979. So bear with me as we go through this journey. So back in 1979, this is Dave Garrett, and Dave was the head coach of Providence College basketball. And Dave had a problem. The problem was he wasn't able to recruit kids from the East Coast. It was very difficult to recruit. And when he went to March Madness, which he made 7 times in 10 years, he got blown out in the first game. He got blown out right away. And so what Dave did is he checked with his like-minded Catholic schools, and that was St. John's, Georgetown, and Boston College, and they all had the same problem. They were once great basketball programs, and they were no longer able to recruit kids. The players wanted to go to Kansas, Kentucky, Duke, UCLA, schools of that nature. And so Dave got together with the coaches from various universities, and what we see here are 3 coaches in the early days of Big East basketball. We have the coach from Syracuse, Jim Boheen. We have the coach from Georgetown, who was a Providence College player, and we have Raleigh Massimino from Villanova. And what we see here are outliers. You have to remember that this was 1980. You didn't really have any Division I coaches that were Jewish, that were black, that were Italian, and all these people were on a mission to make their program as best it can be. So you have to remember that back then their average pay was $20,000. And people will work for a paycheck, but they'll slave themselves for a cause. And all these people were on the same cause. So they formed together, and they formed Big East basketball. And this is the first Big East Conference Championship back in 1981 at the Providence Civic Center in Providence, Rhode Island. So how do they come up with a solution to cure this problem outside of just forming a confederacy called the Big East basketball? Well, the first thing is you want to take advantage of the assets that you have. And so what we have here is a map that shows the schools from Boston College, Providence College, UConn. Up in the top left, we have Syracuse, St. John's, Villanova, and then Georgetown down in DC. And what we see is a very, very large population base. And so this is unlike Kansas, Kentucky, the schools on the Midwest, and the schools on the West Coast. And so this is what's referred to as Bosnia wash, okay? So if we take this area and we spread it vertically, it's referred to as the Northeast megalopolis. And what the result is you have 17% of the US population living on less than 2% of the land. And they're basically all along the 95 corridor and all along the East Coast. And so if you're a head coach of a Division I school, and your schools are all along this, the first thing you're going to tell everyone is, hey, come to my school, and your mom and dad, your aunt and uncle, they can just drive up and down 95 and see your games. If you're in Kansas or in Kentucky, you're not going to be able to go see your son's games. But come to a Big East school, and you'll be able to do that. The second thing they did, and again, times were changing, this was the early 80s, is they said, we need to get a TV deal. We need to be on TV. And so, if you're a Big East school, and you're on the East Coast, and it's 1980, the first thing you're going to do is go to Bristol, Connecticut, and go to a small network called Eastern Sports Programming Network. And that was ESPN. That was the first thing they did, was struck a TV deal. So now you have a scenario where you could say, mom and dad and your aunt and uncle can drive and go see your games, and every Friday, a Big East game is going to be playing. You're going to be on television. And so what happened was they started to get success from this. And so this is the most recruited player back in 1981, Chris Mullin, and this was his best friend, Ed Pickney. They were both New York City kids, and everybody was shocked when they decided together, let's both go to Big East schools. So Chris Mullin went to St. John's in New York City, and Ed Pickney went to Villanova in Philadelphia. And then they had one more trick up their sleeves. They said, rather than do our conference championships at somebody's school or in some arbitrary field house, we're going to go to Madison Square Garden. And your conference championships every year are going to be held in Madison Square Garden, which is where the Knicks play, and it's the world's biggest sporting arena ever. And so that really helped set the Big East on fire. And the proof, again, was the next year. Because the next year, there was a player that was 7 feet tall, that moved like he was 6'3", a very, very aggressive player, the most recruited player ever at that time in college basketball. And his name was Patrick Ewing. And he decided to go Big East, and he went to Georgetown. So now, after 3 years, you had teams that were full of kids from Baltimore, from Philadelphia, from New York, from Boston, and they played their type of basketball. And you didn't just have one player, you had a full team. And so the result was, these other teams just couldn't handle it. The game changed. It got much more physical. It got far, far, far more exciting, and everybody loved it. And the result was, a Big East championship team was crowned national champions in just 4 years. That's how quickly they changed the sport of basketball. And it was so dominant that the next year, in 1985, you had 2 final teams, Villanova and Georgetown, coming from Big East, but it got even better than that. You had the final 3 or 4 teams being from the Big East. That's how dominant they were. That's how quickly they arose, and that's how dominant they were. We call this blitz scaling in entrepreneurship. But again, it's not just the problem, the solution. When that happens, you get opportunity. So what was the opportunity that was presented? Well, this is a guy named Sonny Vaccaro. And Sonny Vaccaro, just like the coaches that we showed, Jim Boheim and Rossi Malamino, John Thompson, he was an outlier too. He was a DJ in Pittsburgh. He was a wedding DJ. And on the side, he used to hold conferences where coaches would scout out players for the Big East. And back then, this was a basketball shoe ad. And as you can see, it's Converse. And that's what everybody wore, was Converse back then. And so what he did was he formed a program. And all the Big East teams, if you notice, yeah, they had short shorts. Everybody had short shorts back then. But all the Big East teams wore Nike. And again, that's because you were paid $20,000. And he made a program that said, I'll pay you $10,000, which was a ton of money for these people and help their programs. And he outfitted them in Nike. And so now they wanted to expand that to the NBA. They said, well, who are we going to pick? Who in the NBA is going to wear our shoes? And they said, we need a player that plays like he plays in the Big East. And they selected this guy. And in entrepreneurship, you try things out, and sometimes they don't work. Nike first came out with this logo for the iconic shoe. We like to say, if you're going to fail, you're going to fail fast. And so they changed it very quickly to this iconic image, which is now the most recognized image in all of branding in the world. But again, it was still more than that. Here's Patrick Ewing and John Thompson with the Gipper, Ronald Reagan. Back in 1984, people really didn't like seeing this. They probably wouldn't like it right now. They certainly didn't like it back then. And so occasionally people would say, well, Georgetown was an all-black team, and John Thompson was a black coach, and he wears this white towel. He's a racist. What do you think he did with that? He just laughed it off like it was no problem, because again, everything was changing. It wasn't just basketball, and Big East represented this. So we all know this guy, he's straight out of Compton, right? Yeah, he's wearing Georgetown. He's wearing Georgetown because he's my generation. If you were a young kid back then, you liked the Big East team. It didn't matter where you were from. You liked the Big East team. You didn't say, hey, I like Duke. They're really good at bounce passes. You liked the Big East team because they were physical, they took it to the hoop, and they played a great game. So here's our favorite guy wearing Georgetown. And so the result was all of basketball just went through the roof. The sport got saved, it got much more popular. So what happened? Well, it comes down to money basically, right? Because again, in the beginning, people were working for $20,000, they were on a mission. And here we have the revenue from 3 of the Final Four teams in March Madness back in 2015. And blue represents the revenue they get from basketball, and green represents the revenue they get from football. Duke arguably probably has the best brand in all of college basketball. I didn't even know they had a football team. And you can see their revenue almost matches their basketball revenue. And so the result was that the Big East had their final conference in 2013, but then it went back to its Catholic roots, and the Catholic schools announced their own Big East program. And so here's a map of the Big East when it was resurfaced in 2014, not so East anymore, but still a very powerful school. And the result was it only took them 2 years to win the national championship. And so remember I talked about empathy? Some of these schools aren't quite the powerhouses they used to be, but they're obviously making changes on that. So here's Patrick Ewing, and here's Chris Mullen, 30 years later, and now they're the head coaches of Georgetown and St. John's, respectively, because they can empathize, and they will have a mission trying to correct those programs. And so that is how problem, solution, opportunity, and entrepreneurship really can be done outside of the business and change the world for a time. Thank you, good night.